At the point when sequential executioners are gotten, they are expelled from society. In any case, the enduring physical proof of their violations. The house where they submitted their killings is frequently left for all to see. They are frequently known as places of horrors, a to some degree newspaper term. However, one which briefly portrays their dreary, inerasable past. At times they are crushed and all proof of even the plot is expelled. Different occasions the houses are destroyed and new ones are worked in their place. Some simply get left where they are, a vacation spot for those with over-the-top nosiness. The following are 10 instances of places of horrors and what was the fate of them after their inhabitants left. Paphos is an excellent Greek island in the northern Aegean Ocean, popular for its unmistakable waters and the customary, basic way of life of its local people. It's a safe house for holidaymakers from great distances abroad hoping to overlook their concerns for possibly 14 days. Its well-known sites incorporate the old theatre, its fascinatingly protected vestiges, and in any case unknown house on Pyramid Vampers. The house was possessed by multi-year-old Theophilus Secidus, his dad, mother and sister and grandma. Like most families in very close networks, they were notable in the territory, thus it struck local people as odd when in May 1996 everything except Theophilus out of nowhere vanished. Theophilus disclosed to police examiners that they had all unexpectedly left Thasos, yet before long changed politeness and chose to tell the abhorrent truth. He had first killed his uncle in a clear demonstration of self-protection and evacuated his head with a knife, in a peculiar wind. Theophilus told police that throughout the following 2 days every individual from his family thusly had endeavored to kill him. Each time he figured out how to fight them off with an unlicensed gun, set their heads in the cooler and put their bodies in squander bags too. When examiners went into the house they discovered cerebrum parts enhancing the dividers and the rugs were doused with blood. Abnormally, the house has been left precisely as it was since 1996. Drapes hang in the windows and a model of a boat designs one of the outside dividers. A huge number of visitors, most presumably accidentally, stroll past it every year with no thought of the abhorrences that happened there. It is clearly available to be purchased. Yet no purchaser has been found. You may not perceive the location, however you'll surely perceive the wrongdoing. 10050 Cielo Drive has seen a lot of VIPs throughout the years. The house was worked for French film star Michel Morgan during the 1940s and housed any semblance of Cary Grant and Henry Fonda. It was claimed by Ability director Rudy Orbitelli, who rented the property to Roman Polanski and his excellent youthful spouse Sharon Tate in February 1969. Polanski left the movie abroad not long after the move, going out with her companions Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger and Wojciech Frykowski. On 9th August, every one of the four were killed, alongside a guest who were closed by house in ruthless conditions by the notorious Manson family. Enrolled by outreaching vagabond Charles Manson, 4 individuals from the family, Patricia Krenwinkel, Susan Atkins, Charles Watson and Linda Kasabian, had been requested to move toward the house and execute everybody inside, intentionally connecting it to a past homicide submitted by Gary Hinman by composing messages on the divider in blood, with the expectation of beginning a race war. The posse were later captured for the homicides and condemned to death, which was later driven to life in jail. The proprietor of the house, Rudy Orbitelli, moved back in following the homicides, and lived there for a further 20 years. Trent Reznor of 9 Inch Nails started leasing the house in 1993 and began recording there, for he guaranteed that he didn't have a clue about its history when he moved in. It was sold the next year, crushed, and another house was based on. John Christie and his significant other Ethel were depicted as a lovely couple who remained quiet about themselves. They showed up simply like a typical consistently couple to anybody they met. However, John had some profound issues which would later bring about him getting one of the most scandalous British sequential executioners. The two inhabited 10 Rillington Place, the keep-going house on a road in Notting Hill, London. Christie's homicide binge started in 1943 when he killed Ruth Furest, a nearby whore. He covered her in the back nursery, which would be later loaded up with increasingly deplorable casualties, somewhere in the range of 1943 and 1953. In any event, 8 individuals would be killed by Christie in the Rillington Place line house. An abnormal bend happened anyway in 1949, when a guest of Christie's, Timothy Evans, educated police that his better half and kid had been killed at the address. 5 police found the bodies and evidently separated a constrained admission from Evans, which he later abjured, censuring Christie for the wrongdoings. In spite of his request, he was hanged in 1950 for the homicides, permitting Christie to continue executing for an additional 3 years, including killing his significant other Ethel in 1952. Christie was in the end kicked out of the house by his landowner when it was found he was renting to an alternate couple. Another inhabitant discovered bodies stuffed inside the kitchen nook and Christie was captured. He was hanged by renowned killer Albert Pierpoint in July 1953, in an endeavor to remove consideration from the location. Rillington Place was renamed Ruston Close not long after the killings and was involved until the whole road's destruction in the mid-1970s. The first area of the house is currently accepted to be among Bartle and St. Mark's Road in Notting Hill. Holcomb is a calm, pleasant territory of western Kansas which lies 70 miles east of the Colorado border. 7. The town is known for its tremendous homestead land, affectionate network, and being the shocking subject of Truman Capote's Without Blinking. The book recounts the genuine story of the terrible homicides of the Cutter family who involved River Valley Farm during the 1950s. While in Kansas State Penitentiary, Richard Dick Hickok gained from a cellmate who had chipped away at Herbert Clutter's ranch that the family were rich. Upon discharge, Hickok selected shrewd accomplice Perry Smith and the two set off on an excursion to Kansas with the expectation of looting the family and making a simple break. The burglary in any case went into a mass killing when, after finding there was no cash in the house, Smith cut Herbert's throat and afterward killed the whole family before making his break. Smith later told police that Hickok was likewise engaged with the homicides, in spite of the fact that Hickok denied this, demanding he had just planned to loot them while Smith, without any assistance, killed them all. 8. Both of them were caught when the cellmate of Hickok found out about the killings and told the specialists. They were later hanged for the wrongdoings. Waterway Valley Farm, despite everything, stands today, and the homicides are no less new in the psyches of numerous Holcomb inhabitants. Guests from everywhere throughout the world, despite everything, visit Holcomb with expectations of getting a brief look at the homicide house, having perused the startling subtleties of the occasions in Capote's celebrated record. The present proprietors of the house anyway don't permit guests onto the property, and a reasonable admonition to trespassers is shown upon the door. The main physical indication of the homicides is a recognition plaque disclosed on the 50th commemoration of the killings. Another nondescript British house, 25 Cromwell Road, was the home to deadly couple Fred and Rose West. Fred was conceived in 1941 in the calm town of Muchmarkel. He ended up being irksome since the beginning. dropping out of school in spite of having an obviously decent home life, despite the fact that he later asserted that his dad engaged in sexual relations with his sisters, something which has never been authenticated. West had a cruiser mishap at 17 years old which evidently harmed his mind enough to cause restricted motivation control and perhaps alter his activities sometime down the road. His life spiraled crazy quick, and he was before long taking and engaging in sexual relations with underage young ladies, something which figured out how to get him shunned from his family. He fathered kids to various ladies throughout the prior years, in the end meeting his future sly accomplice Rose in 1969. In 1971, the principal murder ascribed to the couple happened while Fred was in jail for robbery. Rose slaughtered his stepdaughter Charmaine, little girl of his past spouse Rena, who had been living with the couple. This was only the start. Mother was killed months after the fact, having visited the couple's first home to gather her little girl. West's wrongdoing binge truly went to high rigging when they moved to Cromwell Street. Both of them proceeded to execute at any rate 13 casualties, covering them in the nursery and a few pieces of the house until their captures. The street on which the house stood is still called Cromwell Street, and it is as yet available by people in general. The house anyway was wrecked in an endeavor by the nearby board to cancel the malice related with the zone. It is presently a pathway interfacing Cromwell Street with the Equal Street. Until the arrival of the book The Devil in the White City in 2003, Holmes was practically obscure in mainstream society, which is astounding considering he killed somewhere in the range of 9 and 200 individuals during the 1880s and 1890s. Holmes was conceived Herman Henry Mudgett in New Hampshire in 1861. He went to clinical school and thought of a technique for bringing in cash from the bodies in the research center there. He would take them, distort them so they couldn't be perceived, and guarantee that the individuals were slaughtered in different mishaps so he could guarantee cash on protection strategies he had taken out on them. He later moved to Chicago, an current city which was planning to have the 1903 World's Fair, and manufactured a lodging that he said was to be utilized for lodging a huge number of anticipated guests. Be that as it may, the fact of the matter was totally different. Holmes had the structure made so that he could execute its inhabitants and transport them to the storm cellar for removal through a progression of trapdoors, concealed passages and sections. The bodies would then be deprived of fragile living creature and offered to clinical schools. He ensured that he utilized a progression of various manufacturers with the goal that no single one knew about the whole plans. The structure even housed its own gas chamber, which Holmes would secure casualties before suffocating them. Holmes was hanged in 1896, and the lodging was in the long run destroyed, yet its area is accepted to be that of the Englewood Post Office. Some in part assembled inside dividers despite everything exist in the cellar, which could have had a place with the murder mansion. At the intersection of Beachcomber Lane and Sealark Road lies a house with a disastrous past. Until June 2001, it was the home of Russell and Andrea Yates. The couple met living in a similar high-rise in Texas and later wedded, promising to have the same number of kids as possible. Andrea had experienced melancholy and a dietary problem in her adolescent years, that appeared to be cheerful and content during her initial relationship with Rusty. The issues began after the introduction of their fourth child, Luke, in February 1999. Andrea endeavored self-destruction a few times and was put on Haldol to facilitate her downturn, which appeared to work to some degree, with her temperament getting more quiet and episodes getting rarer. The couple were prompted by their primary care physician to have no more kids, yet in the end Andrea got pregnant with her fifth youngster, a young lady they named Mary, conceived on November 30, 2000. Upon the introduction of Mary, Andrea quit taking her physician-endorsed prescription and backed back into extreme misery. Russell was firmly prompted by their primary care physician Mohammed Saeed to forestall Andrea from investing any energy alone with the youngsters. However, Russell overlooked the admonitions, accepting that she required more independence. On June 20, 2001, Andrea was left with the kids when Rusty went to work. She made a beeline for the restroom, ran a shower and continued to methodically suffocate every last bit of her 5 kids individually. She at that point rang her better half and expressed now is the right time. Yates was detained for the killings before being moved to a mental office in 2006 after a retrial saw her not as blameworthy by reason of madness. The 3-room home, despite everything, stands and now fills in as an investment property in the wake of being remodeled following the violations. It initially pulled in a great deal of consideration from individuals who had perused of the case, yet now appreciates a progressively serene presence. 92 2nd Street in Fall River, a Bristol County zone of Massachusetts, has a significant contrast from the remainder of the passages in the rundown. Perhaps because of the measure of time that has slipped by since the killings, and furthermore in light of its place in legends, the house is presently an unashamed vacation spot. It was the home of the Bordens, a divine being dreading family who delighted in a monetarily agreeable presence which was frequently defaced with contentions and columns over the dad's activities. Andrew Borden was not an especially well-known man. He had developed extraordinary riches in his years as a fruitful representative, however had been blamed every so often for participating in obscure business bargains and evidently made various adversaries on his ascent to success. On August 4, 1892, Lizzie, the most youthful little girl, shouted to the servant from the first-floor living room. Andrew had been killed, apparently in his rest. An axe-like instrument had been utilized to give in his skull in with roughly 10 savage swings. Moving to the room, the pair additionally found the mother dead, her skull squashed likewise. The homicide weapon was found in the cellar, and being first on the scene with no different suspects, Lizzie was accused of the killings. Nonetheless, the jury at her preliminary cleared her and she kicked the bucket in Fall River in 1927. The house where the homicides occurred is currently a quaint little inn, which is vigorously themed on its dull past. The proprietors orchestrate talks and murder voyages through the property to visiting visitors, in case you're interested. John Wayne Gacy, known as the Killer Clown, was convicted of killing 33 people between 1972 and 1978, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in the United States. Gacy was born in 1942 to Marion and John Gacy Sr., an abusive alcoholic who the young Gacy idolized. 18. Gacy was known in his local area initially as Friendly Person, always willing to support local charities, often dressing up as a clown to entertain the children. It soon became apparent that Gacy had another side though. In the late 1960s, he spent time in prison having been accused of sodomizing a young man who worked in the same franchise restaurant he had become employed by through his wife's father. After being released from prison, Gacy learned that his wife had left him. He married again in 1972, and things seemed to be going well. He was popular in the local neighborhood, and often had people around to his house on 8213 Summerdale Avenue, although people frequently complained about the smell coming from the basement, although he had already begun murdering before. Upon his second wife's departure in 1975, Gacy's killing escalated. His modus operandi was to invite young boys back to his house to show them a magic trick with fake handcuffs. Having restrained them, he would murder them and bury them in the crawl space underneath the house. 19. He was eventually arrested for his crimes when his last victim was linked to him. During the removal of the 27 bodies buried at Gacy's property, police demolished a house. The lot stood abandoned for years before being bought. A new property was built on it and the address was changed to throw off would-be sightseers. The property still attracted visitors, however, some who would arrive on a tour bus to gawp at the home of one of the worst serial killers in American history. Dennis Nilsen was a British serial killer with a habit for keeping his victims' remains around his house long after he had dispatched them. He has been known as the British Jeffrey Dahmer. Nilsen spent time in the army in the Metropolitan Police Force before leaving his duties and starting his murdering spree in 1978. Nilsen found his victims by trawling the pubs and clubs in the area and inviting men back to his flat. Afraid of the loneliness which would follow them leaving, he would murder them and often spend time sleeping with their corpses before disposing of them. He spent 3 years killing at his first address, 195 Melrose Avenue, where he would burn the remains in the back garden or bury them under the floorboard. 12 victims were murdered in the first address, causing Nilsen issues with storage. He eventually had to resort to repeatedly spray his room because of the number of flies the corpses were attracting. In 1981, he moved to 23 Cranley Gardens, where he killed a further 3 people. It was here his crimes were discovered after the other residents of the building called a plumber to investigate the smell coming from the drains. The plumber discovered human remains and the police were contacted. He was sentenced to life in prison in 1983. Both houses are still standing and both still have tenants who understandably don't like talking about the past. In August 2013, Nilsen's Cranley Gardens residence was put on the market for £100,000 lower than the value in the hope of attracting anyone to try to forget what happened there.